Hey everybody, welcome to Board Game Heaven. In this episode I'm going to talk about Chimera Station, the Euro edition. This game was originally published by the Tasty Minstrel games, and the Euro edition is published by Brewer. It's a game by Mark Major, and in this game you're all building a space station. It's 2 to 4 players, it plays in about an hour and a half, and you're using tiny alien customizable workers, so it brings a new twist to the classic worker placement genre. So let's open up the box, show you what's inside. I'll do a setup and explanation of the rules, and then I'll tell you what I think about it. Chimera Station by Tasty Minstrel Games, published by Brewer in the Euro edition. This is the back of the box, shows you the components and what it's about. So let's quickly open it up. Okay, so first, here is the game board, which I will open. And there you go. And it has all the spots where you can build your tiles and put your workers. Nice illustrations, everything's clearly depicted with pictograms. Alright, then some punch boards. Here is a punch board with some of the tiles and the money, food tokens, the science level token, and the round token, one of the round tokens. Another punch board with more money and more tiles. And a points marker. Another one, more tiles, more money, another round marker, another victory point marker. These are the players' victory point tracking markers. And another one. So those are the punch boards. Here is the French rulebook and the Dutch rulebook. Obviously, it comes in multiple languages, so you will have an English or an Italian or a Spanish rulebook as well, or a German. Here are the player dashboards, so the cards where you put your workers and your resources and your science level. There's a player aid here that shows you what the various components do that you can splice your aliens with. And they are double-sided. On one side you have an extra skill, basically, and on the other side you don't. So this is the symmetrical version of the game, and on the other side you have the asymmetrical version. So you can play the game however you prefer. And there's 4 of them. There's the eco-friendlies, the green player. The red ones are the toughies. The purple ones are the brainiacs, and the yellow ones are the weirdos. Well, there's an overview of all the modules that you can build. Okay, which is also handy. There's the deck of cards in 2 languages. And here are all the aliens components that you can snap together. Okay, let's set up the game. The setup of the game is as follows. You have your board. On the board you have your rounds over here and these round markers which indicate which round you're currently in. So you cover up the 2, 3, 4 and 5th round for now. There's the score track around the board over here, and you have these score markers. Once you pass 100 you get this, and pass it again you can flip it over, so that's to keep score. Then there's these 2 command centers, and the second command center is time locked, so you put 2 of these timer tokens on top of that, and each round you take 1 away, so in the 3rd round you will have 2 command centers. Then you shuffle this stack of tiles and you pick the top 6 and you put them in the reactor in these spots. Then each player gets his or her player board, And you have your own score token over here, your marker that you put on spot number 10. And you get this science research token that you put on the start level. And you can level up your research with that just by moving it up like so. You get a player aid card that explains the different rounds and what you do in them. And there is a stack of cards that you shuffle. You put the top 3 open so everybody can see them. You take 6 of your workers, and depending on with how many players you're playing, you put 2, 3, or 4 on the board. So let's say we're playing a 4-player game. We get these 2 workers. In a 2 to 3-player game, you get a third one. In a 2-player game, you get the 4th one. That's indicated here as well. The player board also has these icons on it, which indicate what the different components do, which I will explain later. You put your components somewhere where everybody can reach them easily. Same with the tokens. You get your food tokens and your 1, 3, and 5 gold tokens. Then there is the first player marker that you randomly give to a player. And starting with the player to the right of the first player, who will be the last in line because you're playing clockwise, you have these starting resources cards, and you have these that say 2+. So for 2 players, you just use these 3 cards. With 3, you put these along with them, and with 4, you use them all. And the player to the right of the first player, so the last player in line, picks a card first. So you get some starting resources. So you get a science level and 2 gold, 5 gold, and 2 food. 2 food, 2 gold, and any component to start with, etc. So let's say the player to the right picks that card, and the next one picks this card, and then the second player picks that card. So the starting player has the last pick, and perhaps he will take this card. So that's that. Let's go to the rules. So the goal of Chimera Station is obviously getting as many victory points as you can and win by having the most. And you are building a space station, and the building will get you those victory points, and there are several other ways that you can earn victory points with. But let's go to discussing the modules first. So we have these modules already printed on the board, and these are your starting modules where you can start. Basically this row here is imaged on here by this central hub, and it is flanked by these 2 command centers. Now this one only gets available in the 3rd round, so for now we only have 1 command hub. We have the central hub, which is these, and we have the reactor core. We have the boiler room, the splicing lab, and the worker lounge. Let's go through those one by one. But before I do, I want to show you all these symbols that are on the back of the rulebook. Now this is a Dutch rulebook, but the symbols are obviously, well, I think very clear. So I'll explain them one by one. So blue elements are always your elements, your aliens, your resources, your tiles, etc. Black, that's the opponent, and gray is all of them, so both. Then we have here the star, that's a victory point with a number in it, that's the amount of victory points. We have gold, we have food. Minuses means you have to pay gold or food. These are the 4 different components that are over here that you can use to splice your workers with. These mean workers that are yours because they're blue with components. And this means any component that is yours. The gray component means a component from the stash. A blue component on the circle means a component that you own on your player board. Here is the same with the worker, so my worker, opponent's worker, any worker. These are the modules, all the tiles that you see here. So blue is mine, gray is the opponent, any, and the red one is the command center. And this stack obviously means this here stack of modules. Then there is a adjacent tile, so it points, like this one for example, points towards all the adjacent spots. This means a card, so there are cards in the game that you can get to have multiple options to enhance your game. An arrow means that you can place your worker somewhere. An X means that you remove something. This is your home base, basically, your stash, your stack, so your card, so to speak. The couch is the worker lounge, which also has that symbol over here. This is the reactor. This is a reactor bonus. So this is the reactor, and these are the reactor bonuses over here. We'll get to that later. This is the research level. The clock means that the number of the current round you're playing. A green V like that means that you activate an effect. And the knife and fork is the feeding phase. So that's basically what all the symbols mean, and once you've seen them, they're pretty intuitive and straightforward. Sorry. So let's go to the rounds. So the game plays in a couple of rounds, and each round has several phases, which are explained on this player aid card. So first you check which round you're in, and if there's a token on that round, you remove it. So in the first round, nothing happens, and starting from the second, you start removing these tokens, and then do what it says on there. Then starts the placement phase, starting with the first player, who has the first player marker, this one. Then you take one of your workers, put it on an available spot, and then the second player places one, the third player places one, etc., until all workers have been placed. So once they're all in place, you can also place them in the splicing lab or possibly in the lounge. And after all of them have been placed, you check which aliens are in the splicing lab, and you splice them, and then you place those on the board as well. And once those have been placed, you have to feed your aliens. So let's start with the placement phase. So you simply take one of your workers, you select one of the spots you want to put them on, and you place them there. So at the start, you have these pre-printed modules, and the first one, as you can see, has a hamburger with a 2. So if you place your worker there, you simply get 2 of these tokens, and you can put them in your personal stash. The second one gives you 3 gold. So basically the same. You take 3 gold from the bank, put it in your personal stash. Now these 4 are interesting. They have several options to choose from. So this one says -2 gold gets you 1 of those red components. So one of these. So you can pay 2 gold from your personal bank and put this one on your personal stash in return. You can also pay 5 gold and get 2 red components, or I can get 2 food if my worker has a red component in it already. And I could also get 4 food if it has 2. The maximum number of components each worker can have is 2. So this one could possibly have 2 red components, and I get 4 food. So that's the 3 options I have here. This one does the same, but for yellow tentacle components. This one does the same for purple brain components, only it doesn't get me food, but coins per component if I already have them and I choose this reward. And the same goes for the food, the green leaf components. So I can pay 2 or 5 or receive 2 gold if it already has a green component. Then there is the laboratory, and that one says if I remove a component from this worker that I place here, if I can, and I can put it on my personal stash and gain a research level. I'm basically dissecting my worker, removing a component if it already has one, and gain 1 research level and the benefit that I get from that. Then there is the constructor. If I place my worker on the constructor, then that means I can take a tile from the reactor, so any of these tiles, can pay for it and build it, and then place my worker on it and activate the available action on that tile. So how does that work? Put my worker here. I select one of those tiles. I need to be able to afford it, so I check my stash. I've got 3 gold. And so I select one of them. So perhaps I want to build this one, and this one would give me 1 food, 1 victory point, and 1 gold, for example. There's several of them, so we have different options. When I do, I take that tile and I place it adjacent to one of the tiles already on the board, and in this beginning of the game it's only these 3. So I have the choice of putting it in either of these spots, and they give me a building reward as well. So what happens, I pay 2 gold in this case. I take 2 of my gold, put it in the bank, and then I check where I want to place it. So for example, I want to feed my workers at the end of the round, so maybe I want to put it over here. So that means this spot gets occupied. I get 2 food from the stash, and I put it in my personal reserve. I've already placed them here. So I build it there. Then I take my worker, I put it on that spot, like it says over here, and I get the reward. So I've already paid for it to build it. I've received my building bonus. I get 1 victory point for building it. So I move my track up 1 spot, and I get 1 food, 1 victory point, and 1 gold. So I get another victory point, another food, and I get a coin back. So that's how that works. And whenever you build a tile from the reactor, the other ones slide to the right. So at some point you will see that the more modules will get built, the more of these rewards will get freed, and that brings us to another thing you can do. I can place any of my workers, when I have still workers available, into the boiler room. Now what does that do? The boiler room will give me 2 gold for each red component on the worker I placed there, plus 2 food for each green component on my worker, and 2 victory points for each brain component on my worker. Then I will get all the available reactor bonuses. So in this case, a victory point and a food, and that could potentially also mean a coin, a component of my choice, and a research level. So the more spots are empty, the better this becomes. And then I can refill the reactor with tiles from the stack. So I just take 6 new ones in this case, or as many as there are free, and I put them back on the empty spots of the reactor. Okay, so that is the reactor, the boiler room. Then there is also the splicing lab. Whenever I have some components available, like this one that I got from my starting resources card, then I can place my worker in the first available spot in the splicing lab. There are only 3 spots available, so pay notice that once they're filled, you can't place any worker there anymore. And then I put an alien here, and I can choose to splice it. Now I don't have to splice it right away, I can do that after the placement phase, but if I already know exactly what I want to do, then I could do that. I only have 1 component in this case, but maybe I'm building something that could get me, if I had built over here, for example, I would have gotten a red component, or a yellow one, or a green one, or a purple one. Well, so let's just say I had that one, and I just want to build it into my worker. I can do that, and it's in the splicing lab. Then there's also the worker lounge, which is basically a last resort spot. If I go there, I get either 1 food or 1 coin for my trouble, but it's mostly used when you're on the board already somewhere and you're removed by another player. Then you automatically get moved to the worker lounge, so you get something for being removed. And finally, there is the command hub. So first we have only 1 command hub, and in the 3rd round we have a second one. And what that does is whenever I put one of my workers on the command hub, and let's say there's a couple of other modules already built, and there's some workers on them as well, and a green one. So then this means, like it's indicated here, I get the first player marker, because that is the same icon that's over here. In this case I already have it, but another player could get it as well by going there. and then you score the victory points of all the occupied tiles by the opponent's workers. So not my own, so this one wouldn't get me any victory points, but the other ones would. So I just check how many victory points there are, and 6 in this case, and I get that many victory points. And as you can see, these also have victory points printed on them, or 1. So you don't get anything from going there because these are already built. These will get you victory points when you build them. These won't. But the command center will get you victory points whenever one of those is occupied by your opponent's workers. So after all workers have been placed on the board, the next phase starts, which is the splicing lab phase. Now, if you haven't already spliced your aliens, you can do so right now. And then those 3, maximum of 3, it could be less, will also be placed on the board on an available spot. Only one alien can occupy a spot. So starting with A, that player takes his worker and places it somewhere he wants to place it. So in this case, I've got a worker with a green component, so I may want to put it over here and gain 2 gold for each green component on my worker. So that would get me 2 gold. Then player B, which is the yellow player, has this one with the crabby hands and maybe wants to put it somewhere as well. And then the final player, who's the green player, has 2 components and maybe also wants to put it somewhere. So after all the aliens in the splicing lab have also been placed, then it's time for the final phase, the feeding phase. Now that means that for all of your workers you need to pay 1 food. So if you have these food tokens and you've got 2 aliens like I do, then you pay 2 food to the reserve, and everybody does that. But if you can't pay enough food, then for each food you can't pay, you need to lose one of the components on your workers. So you need to take one of your workers, remove one of the components and put it back in your personal stash. And if you can't do that either, then you have to lose 2 victory points per worker you can't feed. So that's pretty bad, and that's why you start at 10 points at the start, because you can lose points right away. So keep that in mind. You want to feed your workers. So let's talk about those components and what they do. Okay, so on your board it's kind of explained. Let me just get these tokens out of the way. So it says here, with a red component, you can move an opponent's worker from any spot to the lounge, but only if it has 0 or 1 component itself. If I have 2 claw components, I can move them all. Doesn't matter how much, because 2 is basically the maximum. So I need to have at least 1 claw component for all the components that my opponent has. So if my opponent has 2, I need 2 claws as well. So if it has 3, for some reason, there is a card in the game that would give one of my workers 3 components. 2 is still all I need to move it. So that's what it says right here. The green ones give me food, so that's handy for feeding your workers. If I have 1 leaf, I don't have to feed that worker, so I have to pay 1 less. If I have 2 leaves, I gain 2 food, so that's also very handy. Then the yellow ones are tentacles. That would get me every time that a worker with 1 tentacle component would get food or coins, I'd get an extra food and an extra coin. So always +1. If I have 2 tentacle components, I also get an extra component whenever I would get a component. And if it says a component of a certain type, so for example, when I build here, or in this case this tile will give me a green component, I get 2 green components if I had 2 tentacles. If it says any component, then I get to choose. And then finally there is the brain, the purple component. That means that whenever I place my worker
on a tile, I also score the victory points from that tile, so that's handy, not only when building it. And when I have 2 brains, that means whenever I place that worker on a command hub, I don't only get the points from the occupied tiles by my opponents, but also my own, because as you will notice, it's a bit hard to see, but this alien is gray and not black, so all occupied tiles will score me victory points. So that is what the components do. And then there's also the research lab here, and when I start out with my token over here, anytime I gain a research level, this goes up by 1 level, and this means I get to draw a card. So I pick one of these available cards, and that in the further rounds that could mean there's multiple cards available, and well, that will give me some benefit. There's cards, these are red cards, which will give me some sort of benefit during the game. And then there's the blue cards that have a module on them, and they basically act as an extra spot I can place my worker on. That's mine only. So this is an exclusive spot for my workers to go to, and that will also get me a bonus. And at the bottom it will say what it will get me at the end of the game. In this case, this will get me 8 victory points. And there's several stuff. Here, this one says it will get me 9 victory points if I have the most food, etc. And there's all kinds of different ones in the game, so you'll always get different ones whenever you play. So that is an extra card. When I go to level 3, I get an extra worker, so I won't have 2 but 3 workers to place. More cards, more workers, more cards. Here at level 7 I get to pick 2 components from the stash, and at the 8th level I get 8 victory points. And should I level up again after that, I remain here, but I get more, again, 8 victory points, and that will keep repeating itself. So leveling up your research level is rather important. So that's what that does. And then on the back you will notice there is an extra thing here that makes the game asymmetrical, because these are basically all the same, it's just the artwork is different in the color. And on this side, then each player will have something special they can do, and they're all different. So that's interesting as well. So let me quickly explain what happens during the round. So during the first round, nothing happens. During the second round, when this gets removed, we remove 1 red tile from the second command hub, from command hub B. So that will get unlocked in the third round, because in the third round, we each get a research level, so every player goes up 1 level. We score double points whenever we build a tile from the reactor, so double victory points. We remove the second lock from command hub B, and that becomes available. And we put out 3 extra cards. So normally you also always have 3 cards out, and whenever a card gets drawn and it's below 3, you refill another card, so there's always 3. In the third round, you put out 3 more cards, so you have 6, and then it'll become 5, 4, 3, and then once it becomes 2, another card will be placed. You don't fill it up all the way to 6, you'll just have 3 temporary extra cards to choose from. And then in the fourth round, nothing new happens, you'll just keep on getting double bonus points for building something. And then in the fifth round, we all get an extra research level again. We score triple points for building something from the reactor, and 3 more cards are laid out additionally to choose from. And then after the fifth round, the game ends, and we start counting our victory points. Now, of course, you'll have to check your victory points on the track. That's the number that you start with. And then there's a couple of extra points you can get. You can get 1 point for each 2 food you've got left, 1 point for each 3 coins you have left, and 2 points for each component currently in your possession, either on the card or on one of your workers. So those also score you points. And then you count it all up, and the player with the most points wins. So my final thoughts on Chimera Station. So It's a worker placement, and usually I'm not into worker placements that much unless they're rather light. And this is what this is. This is a light worker placement, and so it's easy to learn, and I think it's accessible to all kinds of gamers. So even if you're really not into Euro games or worker placements, give this a try. This might surprise you. It's light enough to be fun, but it has lots of interesting choices as well. So it has certain depth to it, and that's what I like about it. I like it visually. It's a nice board. All the icons are very clear to me. You kind of intuitively understand what they do, but if you don't, you still have the card that explains all the modules, and you have the back of the rule book that explains all the icons as well. So that's pretty clear, and so that's good. These components are absolutely fantastic. I really like these workers. I like how they pop apart and how you can splice them with these components. Great fun. I like the fact that you've got a regular version and an asymmetrical version, and well, so that's all. That's got that going for it. There's plenty of tiles, so you shuffle them, and there's plenty of different things to do each game. And I found that it only takes about a couple of rounds, or maybe one entire game, to really grasp the game, to really get what you're supposed to do. Because the first time you play, you might be, well, okay, so what do I do? So you just don't overthink it. Don't get analysis paralysis. Just do something. Just look what's available, place your workers, get the rewards, and go from there. And after one or maybe two rounds, you'll notice, okay, I need to watch out to get enough food, or I need to get more money because I can't build anything, or I need to, etc. So you'll get that pretty fast. So that's an easy to learn game, which is also a big positive. I like the fact that it has cards that can give you extra benefits. And well, that's really it. I've demoed it at Spiel 17 for Game Brewer, and I found that most people who played it really enjoyed it, and they were told to play 3 rounds to get the tables going. But a lot of people really, they finished the game because they liked it so much, and it sold really well. And so yeah, I think it's a solid game. It's definitely worth a try. Even if you don't like this type of game, just try it out. You might like it, you might be surprised. And for people who love worker placements, this is definitely a recommendation. So I'm giving this a big thumbs up. And so that was Chimera Station by Mark Major, published by Tasty Minstrel Games and Game Brewer. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please subscribe, and see you next time on Board Game Heaven.